Welcome everyone to Chapter 6. This is Fields of Social Work Practice. This chapter here is laid out pretty easily in terms of what it has to share. A field of practice is a setting in which a social worker is working with clients that have similar situations or similar characteristics or problems. There are 13 different field settings here that are shared in this chapter. And at the beginning of each one, there's like a little scenario. I strongly encourage you to read the scenario because it gives you a good idea of what a social work kind of normally encounters working in that particular field setting. So be sure you read each of those and all 13. I'm going to just highlight a few. This is pretty much, it can be a self-study. They have things like aging, alcohol, and substance abuse, and child welfare. I do want to say a couple things about child welfare. And you can go on and see the rest of them. Now be sure, oftentimes at the beginning of these sections in the book, they'll have overall global statistics about aging, about alcohol and substance abuse. You do want to know those overall kind of global statements and statistics that are being made in each of these different fields of practice. Those are often things that'll appear on the quizzes. So let me see if I can take a quick look. For instance, like with the population in the United States, you want to look at just how the population is aging. It gives some natural breaks there that at 85 years old and older, the population is already 70% female. You have different things like that, and that the over age 65 is already equal to about 13% of the population. All those things are important, knowing the population. And whatever field a social worker goes into to work, they need to know those global things. They need to know the characteristics about that. They need to know the characteristics about alcohol and substance abuse, about child welfare, about community and neighborhood work. So all those things are important. But I'm primarily going to leave it to you to look at each one of those fields of social work. They're laid out in a very systematic way for you. But there are a few things I do want to highlight. In the section on child welfare, be sure you see that there are some very large subsections. You have protective services, you have foster care, residential care, and adoption. Each one of those are huge in and of themselves, and they all fit under child welfare. Well, why is child welfare so big? Child welfare is probably the premier responsibility that the profession of social work has. We're really looked at as, so to speak, society's agent for the welfare of children. Now, other people are involved, law enforcement, psychologists, teachers, others are involved in the overall welfare of children. But society has really given it to social work to be their agent. More than the other profession, we're the lead profession in this. We're the lead profession in foster care and in protective services. And within each of these sub kind of categories that are there, they also have some of those statistics, those overall statistics that I was mentioning to you. Be sure you do pay attention to them. Another area in this chapter that I want to point to your attention, because I've noticed that oftentimes people, for whatever reason, whether it's not taking the time or the organization to keep straight in community and neighborhood work, you have three distinct things there. You have community organization, community planning, and community or neighborhood development. Now, all of those are part of the overall community neighborhood work, but they have some distinctions. Community organizing is something you can actually specialize in. There you're actually working with your clients. Instead of being an individual or a couple or a family, Your clients are actually the community at large and the organizations that are represented there. So you're working with different organizations and getting them to work together, getting them to identify the needs that there are in the community, the gaps in services, and you're organizing the community overall. And you learn a different set of skills or some specialized skills in order to do that. Community planning is a little bit different. Community planning is when you have the opportunity from the beginning, like, say for instance, someone was going to be building a senior center for a community for seniors, a place for them, say, to retire, whatever. It would be wise to involve a social worker in that. Not that social workers know how to build, condominiums or apartments or that, but they know the needs and the particular characteristics of the elderly. And they can be a part of the planning process. How do people get around? Transportation is very important. Are there things available in terms of easy access for medical care? How is communications set up? All kinds of things that go into being a part of a community that would then make it much more supportive and friendly for that particular population being in there. So again, be sure you read each of those under community and neighborhood and know the distinct characteristics for each of them. Now you will go through the rest of them. You'll see that there's family service, there's income maintenance, there's working in schools. I do want to say something about mental health and illness, that field there. That's another field where social work is one of the premier professions. Now you might normally think, yeah, mental health, wouldn't that really be more like the psychiatrist and the psychologists, or maybe doctors, medical doctors? Absolutely, they are very involved and very identified with that. But in terms, let me just say this, in terms of sheer numbers, there are far more social workers who are working in the mental health field and doing therapy, doing assessment, than there are psychologists or psychiatrists. So that's another big field, that we're in. All right, I think with that, that's pretty much for this chapter. I'm going to leave it to you to go through. And I wanted to point out, too, that, because I don't think I've said up to this point, but you may have noticed that there are boxes that talk about Demetria. Demetria is a new social worker, and throughout the textbook, it kind of follows her development as a new social worker. And as I've encouraged you to before, and even in this chapter, with the scenarios that there are under each of these fields of practice, you can follow Demetria's development as a social worker throughout this course and the textbook. Now, again, there's not going to be a specific question on Demetria and what did she do in this situation. But for those of you who are curious about how social workers actually function, again, it's very accurate as to how things actually happen. Okay, so with that, there's only going to be one video here on this chapter. It's straightforward. Be sure to go through each of those sections. You know the fields, the characteristics, the global kind of statistics under each of them. And with that, I think you'll be well prepared then for any questions that come from this chapter on the quiz. All right, thank you.